PlayStation's decision to discontinue physical release of games is apparently an inevitable thing. According to the new data, back in 2009, there are 292 million physical units being sold. By June of this year, it dropped to 37 million. And thanks to PlayStation discontinuing physical sales until 2028, that number of 37 million will eventually drop to zero. If there are 292 million physical sales in 2009 and 37 million physical sales in 2026, that's a reduction of 15 million sales on average per year. So by 2028, there would only be 7 million physical sales. And by 2029, there won't be anyone making physical copies of games anymore. Oh, sorry, those are the stats of the overall physical copies. For PlayStation, it's basically going through the same trajectory, but worse. The chart is showing data from 2009, but the situation back then is way different to today. Back in those days, the internet infrastructure isn't good enough to stream HD videos, let alone download gigabytes of games. Back in those days, the only way for you to get full copies of major AAA releases like Uncharted 2 or Modern Warfare 2 Original is only through the physical Blu-ray copies of those games. Right now, we have way better internet, way better digital market, way better data distribution. It's all way better. People can download hundreds of gigabytes of games in just a couple of hours. Back in 2009, that is a luxury. Right now, that is normal. This does not mean the market for physical copies is suddenly gone. People still buy vinyl, even when Spotify exists, and they're still making vinyl players to this day, like this one from Audio-Technica. This doesn't mean Sony or Microsoft should stop supporting Blu-rays, even if they will end up being a product for enthusiasts. Blu-ray films or series tend to have way better quality than streaming. They're still going to be produced to this day because there's a market for it. There's still a market for physical, and Sony just refuses to support it. Sony is losing profit margins, and they're gonna get in whatever ways they can, even at the expense of the consumers. I think Sony should provide support for external Blu-ray readers. That's a reasonable compromise to keep physical copies alive. That's how physical copies can still function on PC. There are still Blu-ray readers and cases with disc reader slots being made for PC. That or just ditch PlayStation and go to PC. Physical copies have turned from a necessity to consume media into a niche product for enthusiasts. PlayStation stops doing physical copies of games because people aren't buying physical copies as much compared to digital, and the digital infrastructure is way better these days compared to back in 2009. It makes sense, but that doesn't mean physical should be dismissed entirely. This is the same thing to what happened to vinyl or CD from music. Why would you want to listen to music with those when you already have music streaming, right? The thing is, for vinyl, CD, DVD, and Blu-ray for audio and visual media, they have hardware that are still being manufactured and still being produced to this day. Game consoles also double as Blu-ray players, and Blu-ray quality of films is undeniably better than streaming. Even Polaroid has its enthusiasts to this day. There are still hardware being manufactured to make those media writable and readable, even when there are digital versions of them that are easier to produce and consume. I don't think there will be any more physical copies of PlayStation games because Sony will not make the hardware to read them or support the manufacturers that make the hardware that read them. At least with the PC, you can find external CD, DVD, and Blu-ray readers and writers that you can just plug into USB, and it'll read them just fine. You can find old PCs that still have disk drives, or even cases that can support them to this day. The only way you can read old PlayStation games is if you have their consoles, and Sony will stop making consoles that have disc readers in the future if they continue through this trajectory. At this point, if you care for physical copies, you are an enthusiast, not a regular consumer. And at that point, if media ownership is an enthusiast thing, you might as well move to PC. At least the ownership there is way more guaranteed. The most harrowing thing about PlayStation removing support for physical copies of games is that they know that this decision is going to cause backlash. They just don't care. They told staffs to have the strictest social media guidelines. They're told to stop commenting on people and resist the urge to respond and all that. Gaming media is continuously pushing news and articles about how physical is unreliable and how Blu-ray copies are gonna rot. No. They're gonna work just fine, assuming that you took care of them. This is just creating unnecessary panic for people. There are DVDs that still work to this day, let alone Blu-rays, which are way more durable. And then, there's the issue of PlayStation receiving an outage last week, as people cannot play multiplayer, or even some single-player games, because they couldn't verify their license with Sony. This is the all-digital future that these manufacturers chose for us. It's one where you must believe in Sony to keep the network infrastructure secure and reliable. Even if Blu-ray copies of games or films are going to be an enthusiast product, even if most people chose to download the games online or chose to stream the films on streaming services because they're more convenient, at least support external Blu-ray readers, or better yet, make one yourself. You don't have to include it in your new console. Modern PCs and laptops don't include disc readers, but at least support the external readers. It's not an unreasonable request to provide software support for those. There are still many people who want to watch their films and series with the least amount of compression, the same way there are still many that want to actually own the majority of the content of their games inside the disc. I get that some of these products will depend on software update, but at least the content is still in the disc. If Sony can come to a reasonable compromise and either make their own external Blu-ray disc reader for future consoles or support the many manufacturers that do make them, that would have been slightly more tolerable. But no. They want to keep all the Sony PlayStation products for themselves, to squeeze as little profit margins as they can. At this point, if you want open hardware support to read physical media, you might as well go to PC. You plug in internal or external readers, and they will read them perfectly fine. Even at the face of an all-digital future threat, there are still many console fanboys that defend it. Me playing digital offline games on my PS5, no problem during the outage. That's wonderful. I'm glad that you're having fun playing offline single-player games that do not require to be online during the PSN outage. I guess you're not gonna offer any sympathies for the many players that play online games but can't. I don't even play multiplayer or online games, but I do know what it feels like being unable to play games because the services are out. I can relate to that. I don't dance on the misery of players who can't play, and here you are doing exactly that. This level of corporate defense is absolutely nuts. Stop, man. You can play digital games offline. Stop with these lies. Except, it's not a lie. You cannot play all digital games offline, especially when they are specifically designed to be multiplayer. You're saying this as if all digital games can be played online. And even if it depends on the game, to say this definitely and confidently is not only misleading, but also pathetic to defend. I believe that PlayStation wouldn't have stopped making physical copies if they are in a better condition as a company. I get that making AAA games is hard, or at least hard on the money, but does it have to be that way? It is just the brutal, unavoidable financial reality of an industry trying to survive when games cost $300+ million. Why do those games cost $300+ million? Black Myth Wukong cost less than $100 million. It looks breathtaking, it sounds amazing, it plays amazing, it won all sorts of awards, and it sold 20 million copies. The point isn't that this is reality. The point is that this shouldn't be the reality. This is a reality that the AAA market chose for themselves. They are the ones that caused their own downfall, and we're the ones who are expected to pay for them. No thanks. I think the Eastern AAA game industry have way better products that are way more sustainable and are way more interesting to support. Even Atlas, who milks their consumers by squeezing as much content from their cash cow franchise, at least the products are still good. I'm genuinely genuinely trying to think of a Western AAA game that managed to excel just as well like the Japanese or Eastern developers in general. I can only think of one. IO Interactive. They only have Hitman as their franchise, but they really expand upon it on every installment and every game. They even allow Hitman 3 to explore Hitman 1 and 2 maps, as their core gameplay is very similar. They also develop and publish their own games, with First Light being their most expensive at over 100 million, which is still somehow comparatively cheap compared to 300 to 400 million live service garbage. The fact that the CEO says that it's about the bang for the buck. You don't see this kind of desire to optimize budget in any other AAA companies in the West. First Light is proof that Western AAA companies can thrive with excellent products, reasonable budgets, efficient workloads, and achievable targets. That's not what I'm seeing in the major AAA Western players, and that's going to be their downfall. Sony keeps getting a lot of backlash for the refusal to continue physical copies that it got people wanting to go back to the good old days of PlayStation. Even back when the PlayStation 5 was released, I remembered how I go back one generation on a PS3 to play games that I actually miss in them, either through the original PS3 console or through emulators like RPCS3, the PS3 emulator for PC. This person is baffled that RPCS3 is someone's favorite emulator. I can't actually make the argument why, but the better question is, why don't you like it? I said that it wasn't up there compared to others like Dolphin. Okay, Dolphin is genuinely an amazing emulator for GameCube and Wii, but I think you should give the RPCS3 developers a break because the PS3 is not exactly an easy console to emulate. RPCS3 still requires quite a beefy hardware in general, but then again, it depends on the games. You should be able to run games like Persona 4 Arena just fine. I can also play Dragon's Crown, Resident Evil Umbrella, and Darkside Chronicles. I can play Dragon Guard 3, I can play Demon's Souls, Dante's Inferno, Wet, House of the Dead 4, Time Crisis 4, Raising Storm, etc. As far as I'm concerned, that's not bad. The one criticism that I can level against RPCS3 developers, and even then I don't blame them entirely for it, is that there are still many exclusive PS3 titles that are still not playable, like Uncharted, Infamous, Resistance, Ratchet & Clank, Killzone, etc. I do not blame them at all. I and many others will wait patiently for their development. Hopefully in the near future, all of those games will be able to be played effortlessly, even on a phone. One can only dream, especially during this hardware crisis. When recent console manufacturers are disappointing people of their future prospects, it's no wonder why people are going back to previous generations to revisit the good old days. But the price of going back can be unreasonably steep. This person noticed the price of a used Nintendo Switch 2 on GameStop to be $440. That sounds nice and all, but then GameStop is also selling a used 3DS for $420. A used 3DS for $420? Why? I honestly have no idea. There are no games being made for the 3DS anymore. It doesn't look like a special edition version. Why is this being sold at near the price of a modern console? You can find used 3DS for around $100, like the one that I had, and install all sorts of games there. You can replace the SD card and install games in it. If you want something more modern with that form factor, the Alien Thor starts at $259 on the Lite version. You can install a 3DS emulator or play other emulated games there. Heck, you don't even need the Alien Thor. You can install emulators on your phone and get yourself a mobile controller. If you want to relive the good old days of portable retro gaming of the DS and 3DS era, buying a used 3DS for $420 is definitely not the right way when there are cheaper and better alternatives out there. Also, GameStop, price this accordingly if you want players to still come to your stores. And that's all for the video today. Here's a cat. Huge thanks to all the wonderful sponsors this week. You're all fantastic. Don't forget to check out my previous videos here. Click the like button, comment, subscribe, join the YouTube membership, leave some tips, just $1 down below. And thanks for watching.